They thought I wouldn't say it out loud, but I did. Right there in the middle of our church's annual family meeting, while everyone passed around banana pudding and whispered blessings, I stood up, pulled out Grandpa's original will, and read the line that changed everything. Elaine Monroe is to receive no direct inheritance. You could have heard a pin drop, and a plastic fork actually did. Hi, I'm Jenna. And no, I never set out to humiliate anyone. I just got tired of being the one expected to rescue everyone else while they ignored the choices that got them there. What would you have done? Before we jump into the story, if you don't mind, let me know where you're from by leaving a comment below. That way, I can send a special hello your way. Now go ahead, grab yourself a warm cup of water and find a comfy spot. It's time to begin the story. I didn't inherit this house. I earned every inch of it, alone. It still amazes me sometimes how quiet it gets here. No footsteps from upstairs, no hum of another voice coming down the hallway. Just me, the creak of the old floorboards under bare feet, and the gentle sound of Coltrane playing from the record shelf I built with my own hands. On mornings like this, I let the music drift through the rooms before the world gets too loud. I cracked open the kitchen window and let in the early spring breeze, thick with dogwood pollen and the scent of fresh-cut grass from a neighbor's yard. It stirred the lace curtain just enough to make it dance. The sky was that soft gray blue that never promises rain, only warmth. I poured cinnamon coffee into my favorite mug, the one Grandpa Calvin gave me on my 21st birthday, the one with the chipped rim I never got around to replacing. Grandpa used to say, "Build something no one can take away from you." I think about that line every morning as I move through this house. It's not big, not fancy, no granite countertops or infinity pools like some of the houses out near Sullivan's Island. But this one has my name on the deed and my sweat in the floorboards. I paid for it with every overtime shift, every vacation I never took, and every Friday night I spent working late instead of going out. And that makes it mine. I passed by the hallway wall where a faint scratch still ran just above the baseboard. I could have sanded it out, painted over it, but I left it. That scratch is from the first week I moved in, dragging in a bookcase that was too wide for the corner. I remember swearing under my breath and laughing at myself. Some things, I think, are better left untouched. They remind you of what it costs to start fresh. 12 years of design deadlines by day, cafe shifts by night, and living lean taught me how to stretch a dollar until it groaned. I remember that moment when the realtor handed me the keys and said, "Congratulations." But there was no champagne, no family celebration, just the click of a deadbolt turning behind me as I stepped into a place I could finally call mine. I walked over to the filing cabinet in the corner of my home office, the one Calvin helped me pick out when I got my first real design contract. The bottom drawer sticks a little unless you pull it just right. I slid it open and paused for a second before reaching inside. There it was, a manila folder with slightly worn edges, neatly labeled in his blocky handwriting. Calvin Walker, Last Will and Testament. I hadn't opened it in months. I didn't need to. I knew what it said. Calvin left everything to me. Not just the little bit of land upstate and the workshop, but more than that, he left me something harder to explain. Permission. Permission to live life without apology, to set boundaries, to stop carrying everyone else's mistakes on my back. The sound of my phone vibrating on the countertop broke the silence. I picked it up. One missed call, voicemail, my mother. Corinne never says too much in one go, but she knows how to wrap a full sermon in 10 words or less. I hit play and leaned against the counter. "Hi, honey, just checking in. We might need to gather a little earlier this year. Maybe Sunday after service. Things are shifting. Elaine and the kids? Well, we'll talk then." That was it. No mention of why. No greeting at the end. Just static and silence. I placed the phone back down and stared out the window at the small patch of garden I tried to keep alive. The rosemary was holding strong. The tomatoes, not so much. Elaine. Even hearing her name felt like someone exhaling too close. It had been months, no, over a year since we last spoke directly. We weren't fighting, not exactly, but we weren't talking either. She lived fast and loud, I lived quiet and rooted. We never did understand each other, even as kids. And after she married Derek and started bouncing from one city to the next, the gap only widened. I opened the cabinet above the stove and pulled out one of Grandpa's recipe cards, banana bread, written in pen with a smudge of flour at the corner. I didn't plan on baking today, but holding that card in my hands brought back his voice. I remembered how he used to wipe his hands on the same red dish towel over and over and say, "You take care of your space, and it'll take care of you." My phone buzzed again. Another message. I pressed play, heart already a step ahead. This time, her voice was clearer, more definite. "They're driving back this way. They'll be at church." I froze. The mug in my hand felt heavier than before. Not just coming home, coming here. That was what she meant, wasn't it? For a long moment, I didn't move. The coffee went cold in my hands as I listened to the wind brushing through the open window. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed. I stood still in my kitchen, holding my coffee like it anchored me to the floor. They're not just coming home, they're coming here. Elaine and I were never close, but somehow I'm always the one expected to save her. It was early evening, and the light from the dining room window spilled across the floor in a soft amber wash, catching the edge of the stew pot bubbling quietly on the stove. I let Coltrane play low in the background, the saxophone winding gently through the stillness like it was trying not to disturb anything. That was how I liked it. Calm, rhythmic, predictable. But that calm had a way of fracturing the moment Elaine entered the picture. Even when she wasn't in the room, she found a way in. I sat at the kitchen table, stirring my stew absent-mindedly, phone in hand, scrolling through her Instagram feed. It felt more like studying a case file than catching up on family. Photos of sandy feet on a beach in Tulum. "We don't need walls to feel safe," the caption read, with Mason and Evie grinning in oversized sunglasses and tie-dye shirts. Another post from Sedona showed Derek meditating cross-legged in front of a red rock formation. Elaine had written, "Real growth happens outside the lines." That one made me close my eyes for a beat. Outside the lines is exactly where she'd lived her whole life, coloring in whatever way felt good in the moment and expecting the rest of us to make sense of it later. I remembered the day she called to say she and Derek were selling their place in Phoenix. "We hit the peak," she'd said, like it was the stock market and she was some kind of housing savant. "We're going mobile, gonna show the kids the real world." When I asked if they had a long-term plan, she laughed. "You live like a librarian with a mortgage, Jenna. I live free." That was the last full conversation we had that wasn't tinged with subtext or silence. A chime from my phone pulled me back. Mom. Voicemail again. She rarely called twice in a row unless it was something she didn't want to say in a message. I pressed play. "Hi, sweetheart. I know this is last minute, but Elaine and the kids might need a place for just a little while. You've got that extra room, don't you? They just need to rest, reset." I thought maybe the guest room. "We'll talk more Sunday at church." I stared at the speaker like the phone might change what it said if I waited long enough. My stew hissed from the pot behind me, over-boiling just slightly, but I didn't move. Just stood there, the weight of her voice still ringing in the room. It wasn't really a question, was it? A few minutes later, the phone buzzed again. Dad this time. I knew better than to ignore him, or he'd just show up at the door with a lecture and a disappointed shrug. "Hey, Jenna." His voice was blunt, a tone reserved for when he thought I was being difficult. "Your sister's coming back with her family. They've been through a lot, okay? And you have 3 bedrooms, just like when she helped you years ago. I haven't forgotten. You shouldn't either." My jaw tightened. Yes, I'd stayed with Elaine once, a decade ago, during graduate school. 3 months on a futon in her studio apartment in Tempe, splitting the electric bill and making lentil soup 3 nights a week. She had a job then. I cleaned. We managed. But this wasn't that. I walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out Grandpa Calvin's will. The edges of the envelope had softened from handling, but the contents hadn't changed. Page 3. I didn't even need to flip to it anymore. All discretionary power regarding inheritance and trust-related property shall reside solely with Jenna Walker. It wasn't about money. It was about clarity. Calvin knew this day might come. He never said it out loud, but I'd heard it in the pauses of our conversations, in the way he sighed when Elaine left another voicemail asking for a loan that never got paid back. He once told me, "Love your family, but don't let them mistake your love for permission." I slid the envelope back into its file. I remembered standing in his workshop a year before he passed, the smell of cedar and varnish thick in the air. He was sanding a bench, said it was for my porch, so I'd always have a place to breathe. "You're the only one who ever listened long enough to understand what stillness costs," he said. At the time, I didn't fully get it. Now, I did. Later that night, I opened the fridge to pack away the leftovers. I stood there a long time with the door open, letting the chill hit my face. It grounded me in a strange way, like holding cold metal when your thoughts start to spiral. Then another ping. Mom again. A single-line message. "Just be open-minded on Sunday. We'll talk as a family." That word. Family. It's used like a key, like saying it should unlock any resistance. But sometimes it feels more like a crowbar. My eyes drifted to my purse hanging by the door. I didn't plan to bring much to church, but I walked over to the drawer near the bookshelf, opened it slowly, and took out the manila folder. The paper inside shifted slightly as I placed it in my bag, like it already knew it was being summoned, just in case. I wore gray, not out of modesty, but because war doesn't need bright colors. Palm Sunday in Charleston had always carried a certain rhythm. There was a kind of quiet optimism in the air, sunlight bouncing off car hoods, church bells humming from 2 blocks over, and rows of children waving palm branches like soft green swords. But this year, I didn't feel lifted by tradition. I felt armored by it. The fellowship hall was already filling up when I arrived. Folding chairs squeaked against linoleum as cousins and in-laws greeted one another with the careful joy reserved for holiday potlucks. I walked slowly, balancing a tray of lemon bars wrapped in plastic. No one offered to help. No one asked what I brought. I placed the tray near the deviled eggs and banana pudding and moved toward a corner of the room. Just as I sat down, my phone buzzed. A message from Mom, one line. "Let's all be graceful today. Please don't bring up paperwork." My fingers curled tightly around the screen. Graceful. I read it twice. The kind of word people used when they expected you to swallow something bitter without letting it show on your face. The room had that familiar Southern church buzz. Sweet tea in styrofoam cups, floral skirts, and the sound of someone's child laughing too loud in the back. The folding tables were dressed in pastel plastic tablecloths, and paper signs marked each food group: casseroles, desserts, salads, with or without mayo. At any other time, it might have made me smile. Mom moved through the crowd in soft pink linen, her arms opening just wide enough to welcome but not invite. When she reached me, her hug barely touched my shoulders. "Elaine's here," she whispered, glancing at the door like she needed the room to see her say it. I turned, and there she was. Elaine walked in like a whisper meant to be overheard, subtle, styled, and timed. Her hair pulled back in a low bun, cardigan draped gently around her arms, and her smile just soft enough to read as humility. Derek followed behind with the kids, Mason in khakis, Evie holding a glittery notebook. The whole picture was composed like a social media post meant to say, "See? We're doing our best." Mom hurried to her side. "Back in the fold," she announced softly, loud enough for the surrounding chairs to turn. I kept my face neutral. Elaine glanced my way, met my eyes, then looked past me like I was part of the backdrop. Dad stepped forward to speak. He never needed a microphone. His voice had always carried the weight of old-school discipline. "Family," he began, "isn't about perfection. It's about lifting each other when the weight gets too heavy to carry alone. That's what today's about. That's what Calvin would have wanted. His name hung in the air like dust in a sunbeam. For a moment, no one moved. Elaine stepped up next, holding Evie's hand. She didn't look at me, but her voice trembled just enough to tug at the crowd. "We've made mistakes," she said. "Tried to live a little too free, but we're home now. We just need a little help, a roof, a hand, just long enough to get our feet under us." A low murmur passed through the room. One cousin nodded. Another gave a soft, "Amen." I looked around at the sea of faces, many of whom hadn't called me in years. But now they watched me like I was the one out of step. I waited until the moment settled into silence, that quiet right after someone speaks their piece and the room assumes it's over. That's when I stood up. I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila folder. It didn't feel heavy until I saw Elaine notice it. I cleared my throat, holding the document gently but visibly. "Before we continue," I said, my voice even, "I think it's only fair to share something that's been kept private out of respect. But today, since Grandpa Calvin's name is being used to justify certain expectations, I feel it's time." I unfolded the page and began reading. "To Jenna Walker, I leave full discretion over the family trust and estate, including property and assets tied to my name. Elaine Monroe is to receive no direct inheritance. This decision reflects a pattern of behavior observed and documented over several years, and it is made with a clear mind and sound heart." There was a gasp from the front. A plastic fork clattered to the floor. Someone whispered, "Wait, what?" I paused. Every eye in the room was on me, but I kept reading. "My desire is for Jenna to choose what peace looks like for her life, and for her to never feel guilty for protecting it." When I looked up, Elaine was staring at me like I'd just struck her across the face. Her voice cracked. "How could you?" I folded the paper and met her eyes, because someone had to remember what Grandpa actually wanted. No one yelled. No one defended me. They just stopped meeting my eyes. The week after Palm Sunday passed like the kind of weather that doesn't make headlines. Cool, gray, with a wind that felt like it was thinking about turning colder, but never quite did. The church bulletin board still had the flyer for the potluck taped up, corners curling, the Sunday at noon faded by sun. I passed it on my way to the store, clutching my grocery list like a shield. Inside the produce aisle, I saw Marla from choir. Blue sweater, hair always pinned just so. She looked up, made eye contact for a split second, and then turned sharply to inspect a row of cucumbers, like they held the meaning of life. She didn't say hello. I wasn't surprised. Not anymore. By Wednesday, the silence had settled into something thicker, like walking through molasses. My phone buzzed constantly, messages that said a lot by saying very little. Thinking of you. Wow, just wow. I didn't expect that from you. Others didn't bother with words, just reactions to Elaine's latest Instagram story. A photo of Evie coloring in the back seat of what looked like their van, captioned, "It's always your own blood." I didn't respond. I didn't have the energy to tell the truth to people who were already writing their version of it. Grandpa used to say, "Silence isn't peace. It's punishment with manners." I understood that now more than ever. No one was arguing. They were just withdrawing, slowly, deliberately. The days passed quietly. I watered the plants. I answered work emails. I moved through my home like it was a museum of decisions I didn't need to explain. The blinds stayed half closed. The porch lights stayed off. Then, Thursday afternoon, I saw it. A comment under one of my older Facebook posts from my cousin Leah. "Can't believe Jenna embarrassed Elaine like that. Shame." No context, no conversation. Just a public, permanent, scarlet letter. I didn't delete it. That night, I made tea and sat in Calvin's old chair by the front window. I let the steam rise up and blur my glasses. Outside, the street was still. Porch lights blinked on across the neighborhood. A kid's bike lay in a front yard, half tipped over, its back wheels slowly spinning. Everything looked like normal life, but I didn't feel part of it. My voicemail light blinked. I already knew who it was. "Jenna," my mother's voice said, sharp and low, like she was trying not to cry but didn't care if I knew she was close. "You may have the papers, but where's your compassion? What happened to the girl who used to leave cookies at her sister's door when she had a bad day? Are you really so proud of your peace that you'd trade your own sister's dignity for it?" There was a pause. Then she hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I just stared at the phone like it was a photograph of someone I used to know. The next morning, Pastor Mark called. I let it ring twice before answering. "I won't keep you long," he said. "Just wanted to check in. You doing all right?" "I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't sure what fine meant anymore. He cleared his throat gently. "People talk, but talk fades. Actions speak longer. Just remember, grace doesn't always look like surrender. Sometimes it looks like standing still when the storm wants you to kneel." He didn't ask for more, and I didn't offer it. That evening, I cooked myself a small dinner: roasted vegetables, rice, a slice of leftover lemon bar. I ate alone, as always. But the silence didn't bother me this time. It didn't feel like a void. It felt like the boundary I'd spent years building was finally doing what it was meant to do. The phone rang again. "Mom." I stared at the screen. I could have let it go to voicemail again, but something in me, call it habit, call it guilt, picked up. She was crying. "You've changed," she said through shaky breaths. "You value money and property over your own sister's dignity. You could have handled it quietly, but you had to make a scene. You had to read it out loud. Was humiliating her really worth it?" I said nothing. "I hope you enjoy that house," she added, her voice tightening, "because don't expect us to come visit when you're old and alone." Click. That one hit deeper. Not because of what she said, but because I'd always known it was how she felt. That all my efforts to build a life with boundaries, with peace, with clarity, none of it mattered if I wasn't still playing the part of the good daughter, the giving sister. After the call, I sat back in the chair and looked around my house. It was quiet, clean, safe, and I whispered, "I'd rather be alone in peace than surrounded in pressure." You don't realize how loud love is until it's replaced by silence. The rain had been falling most of the afternoon, steady but soft, like it was more interested in keeping rhythm than soaking anything through. I sat near the window, watching the rivulets race down the glass like old friends who never quite met. The air smelled like wet pavement and rosemary from the planter box by the back steps. I hadn't seen anyone from church since that Sunday. No calls, no invites, no follow-ups. But that wasn't the kind of silence that hurt anymore. This kind, this silence, it was earned. And in its way, it was healing. That morning, I decided to clean out the small workshop Calvin left behind. I'd kept it mostly untouched since he passed, sweeping occasionally, watering the geraniums out front, dusting off the old calendar that still hung on the pegboard wall, frozen in April 2018. The air inside was sharp with wood oil and memory. His tools hung where he'd left them, outlines faintly sketched on the wall behind each. I started with the top drawer of his old workbench, rulers, pencils dulled to nubs, half a deck of playing cards, and a small cassette tape. No label, just a strip of masking tape with his handwriting. For Jenna, 2005. I blinked at it, then turned to the dusty cassette player sitting on the shelf nearby. I had no idea if it still worked, but something in me said, try. The moment I hit play, static filled the room. Then his voice, warm, gravelly, unmistakable. "Hey there, baby girl, you're 16 now, probably taller than your mom and twice as stubborn. Just wanted you to have this, in case someday you forget how sure I am of you." There was a pause. I could hear him shift in his chair, maybe wiping his hands on that same red shop towel he always carried. "Whatever you choose, I trust you. Don't let their volume drown your value, and don't ever confuse silence with weakness. Some people talk so loud just to cover up how little they really know. You don't have to do that. You just gotta be clear and kind and hold your line. I turned the player off, but I didn't move. I just stood there, hands braced on the edge of the bench, head bowed like I was praying without words. Sometimes people leave you love not in hugs or praise, but in proof that they saw who you were becoming long before you did. That evening, as the sky darkened to a soft slate gray, the phone rang. It was Aunt Renee. I hadn't expected to hear from her. She wasn't the meddling type, more like the quiet observer who always knew more than she let on. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, her voice gentle like a porch swing in motion. "Not at all," I replied, folding laundry on the couch, the kind of simple act that steadied me these days. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I just wanted to tell you what you did." That was brave. I waited. "You did what a lot of us never dared to do," she continued. "You said no, not out of anger, but out of clarity. That's not cruelty, sweetheart. That's courage." I pressed the phone closer to my ear, as if her words might settle deeper if I could just hold on to them long enough. "Thanks," I said, almost in a whisper. "You're not alone," she added, "even if it feels like it." After we hung up, I made tea and sat by the front window again, the same spot where I'd sat the day after the fallout. The street was still, puddles reflecting porch lights, and the occasional car tire hissing past. Just as I set down my cup, I noticed something taped to the front door. I opened it slowly. The rain had let up, leaving behind a crisp dampness that smelled like pine and pavement. A white envelope flapped lightly in the breeze. No name on the outside. I opened it. Inside was a folded piece of construction paper, purple with marker lines drawn unevenly across the front. A simple house with a rainbow above it. Stick figures drawn with tiny hands, one with straight brown hair, one in a ponytail, and two small ones between them holding hands. Me, Elaine, Mason, and Evie. On the back, in the unmistakable scrawl of a child's hand, from Evie. My throat tightened. I stepped back inside and closed the door behind me. Without thinking, I walked to the small wooden table in the living room where I kept the beeswax candles Calvin used to hand-roll each Christmas. I lit one. The flame flickered gently, casting a soft glow across the room. I placed the drawing beside it. My breath shook, but it was the kind that comes not from fear, but from release, from finally letting go of the weight I didn't need to carry anymore. Later that night, I pulled out my journal. I hadn't written in it in weeks, but tonight felt different. I didn't write a letter to Elaine. I wrote to the version of myself who used to apologize for breathing too loudly. And this time, I didn't say sorry. I said thank you. I didn't expect an apology. I just stopped waiting for one. By the time July rolled around, Charleston had leaned fully into summer. Warm wind off the water, the smell of fried dough in the air, and red, white, and blue pinwheels spinning on every street lamp. The annual community fair set up along the waterfront just like it did every year, with lemonade stands, quilt raffles, and booths where kids could win goldfish that would never survive past Tuesday. I volunteered for the lemonade booth, the one Calvin used to help run back when he had more patience than mobility. I could still hear him telling wide-eyed kids, "You get what you give. Want the best lemonade? Smile when you ask." I used that line today, and it still worked. The shade under the tent was barely enough, but we had fans and a cooler full of ice. I was tying ribbons on prize jars when I heard my name. "Jenna?" I looked up to see Sarah, an old friend from choir, back when I still sang on Sundays. She wore a sun hat and held a mason jar of sweet tea in one hand, her eyes squinting against the sun. "Hey," I said, genuinely surprised. She smiled, then hesitated before stepping closer. "I just wanted to say, back then at the church, a few of us understood. We just didn't have the guts to say it out loud." Her words hit like a balm. Not dramatic, not overdone, just honest. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." She gave my hand a quick squeeze, then walked off toward the cakewalk line. I watched her go, wondering how many other quiet allies I never knew I had. The fair buzzed with life. Kids running with balloon swords, teenagers complaining about sunburns, older couples sharing kettle corn from paper cones. Somewhere behind me, a band was setting up for the evening concert. I turned to refill the lemonade pitchers when I felt a familiar presence behind me. "Still cutting lemons the hard way?" my father's voice said, softer than I remembered. I glanced over my shoulder. Russell stood with his arms crossed, not confrontational, just present. That alone was unusual. "I prefer control over the juice," I said, half smiling. He nodded slowly, then picked up a cup from the tray. "I still don't agree with how you did it," he said, not looking at me. "But I understand now." I didn't answer right away. I handed a cup to a little boy who couldn't quite reach the table and then wiped my hands on a towel. "I wasn't trying to burn bridges," I said eventually. "I know," he replied. "But sometimes when you build walls, people forget how to knock." I met his eyes. For once, there was no battle behind them, just tired acceptance, and maybe something close to respect. "I'm glad you came," I said. He gave me a slow nod, then turned and walked back into the crowd. Later, as the sun dipped lower, I saw Elaine near the picnic area. She was wearing sunglasses, even though the light was already fading. Mason sat on the grass, legs crossed, trying to assemble a glow stick. Evie twirled nearby with a ribbon streamer. Elaine didn't look at me, but Evie did. She saw me across the field and waved, small and quick. I lifted my hand in return, no big gesture, just enough. We stayed like that for a moment. Then she turned back to her mother, and I turned back to my table. Pastor Mark passed by as I was restocking napkins. He tipped his hat slightly and murmured, "Sometimes strength looks like silence." I smiled. That's the only kind I've got left. A few minutes later, a little girl with pigtails approached the booth with a raffle ticket and a hopeful look. "Can I get the purple one?" she asked, pointing to a glass jar with glitter inside and a ribbon half unraveled. "Absolutely," I said, tying a fresh bow on it before handing it over. She beamed and ran off, and for the first time in a long while, I realized I wasn't thinking about who was watching. I wasn't looking for approval. I wasn't defending or justifying or anticipating backlash. I was just doing. That night, after the fireworks faded and the streets cleared, I came home to the soft hush of my house. The quiet no longer felt empty. It felt full of choices I had made for myself. I opened my journal and wrote, "I didn't build this life for applause. I built it so I could finally exhale. Sometimes the strongest peace isn't loud. It's the quiet you create after deciding you no longer owe anyone your silence." That moment at the fair, ribbon in hand, I realized I hadn't chosen distance. I'd chosen dignity. Families don't always understand your boundaries, especially when they're used to your compliance. But in life, peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the presence of self-respect. As Grandpa once said, closure doesn't come from others. It's what we give ourselves when we finally stop waiting for permission to breathe. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share your own journey or simply stay for the next story. I'll be right here.